The day began quickly. Steven Seagal, dressed in a plain black jacket and sunglasses, walked through the busy outdoor market with his teenage daughter, Ava. It was one of the few afternoons when he was not filming, traveling, or training. This day belonged only to them. Ava moved ahead with excitement, stopping at a small booth full of handmade bracelets. Her laughter mixed with the calls of vendors announcing their prices. Steven watched her from a short distance. Years of martial arts training had sharpened his awareness. He could judge people in a moment. Their movement, their focus, even their breathing. And deep inside, his instincts warned him that two men nearby were out of place. They were not shopping. They were not browsing. They were observing. One of them, tall and thin with restless behavior, nudged the other and quickly pointed toward Ava. Steven's eyes narrowed. His posture stayed relaxed, but his attention became sharp. He shifted slightly to gain a better angle without being noticed. Ava picked up a bracelet and examined it closely while smiling at the vendor. She did not see the men moving closer behind her. The tall man muttered something, and the other gave a slight nod. They pretended to inspect hats at a nearby stand, but their focus remained on Steven's daughter. Steven took another step forward, blending into the crowd. He noted every detail. Their timing, their coordination, their signals. His heart rate stayed steady. His breathing remained calm. He was fully controlled. Ava stepped aside to look at another bracelet, briefly separated from the crowd. That was the opening the kidnappers needed. The thin man whispered, "Now." Before Ava could turn, a raw hand grabbed her arm. She cried out in shock. The second man covered her mouth and pulled her back. She fought hard, kicking and twisting, but they were quick and strong. Within seconds, they dragged her toward a van parked at the edge of the market. People screamed. Vendors froze. Steven Seagal's world narrowed into a single moment. His daughter was being taken, and the kidnappers made one critical mistake. They had no idea who her father truly was. The kidnappers forced Ava toward the van with brutal speed. Her muffled cries were drowned by the engine as it roared to life. Steven ran through the crowd, every step driven by purpose. People stumbled aside in shock at his sudden change. The calm father from moments earlier now moved with the speed of a trained fighter. "Ava," he shouted, his voice low but strong enough to rise above the chaos. He reached the van as one of the men tried to shut the door. Steven grabbed the handle and pulled with enough force to bend the metal. For a brief moment, Ava's frightened eyes met his, wide and pleading. "Dad." Then the door slammed shut. The van surged forward. Tires screeched as it sped out of the market. Steven did not hesitate. He ran alongside it, his hand still gripping the handle. The van swerved sharply, forcing him to jump back or be crushed. In those seconds, he memorized everything. The license plate. The dent in the rear bumper. The tattoo on the driver's neck. Years of training allowed him to take in details others would miss. Someone shouted, "Call the police." But Steven was already dialing his phone. He called a contact served as Hawk, a close friend in law enforcement. "Hawk," Steven said, his voice cold and focused. "My daughter's been taken. White van. License Pitokilex Shamnaput They're heading east." Hawk's tone shifted instantly. "I'm on it. I'll alert every unit in the city." Steven ended the call and ran toward his car parked nearby. His mind stayed calm. It calculated routes, exits, warehouses, and roads leading out of the city. He understood how criminals plan. He understood their habits. He understood their fear. As he reached his car, a terrified vendor grabbed his arm. "Sir, those men look dangerous. Shouldn't you wait for the police?" Steven looked at him with steady eyes. "They don't have time." He jumped into his car and started the engine. The tires squealed as he pulled into traffic, searching every lane for the van. His breathing stayed controlled, but his heart carried heavy pressure. The city was packed with traffic. Horns blared. Cars barely moved. But Steven drove smoothly, slipping through openings with perfect timing, checking mirrors and intersections with exact focus. I hit a clear stretch and called Hawk again. "Any updates?" Traffic cameras tracked them toward the industrial zone. "That's where they're taking her," Steven said. "I'm heading in." He ended the call and pressed harder on the accelerator. Buildings rushed past as he neared the forgotten side of the city. Dumpsters, broken lights, graffiti-covered factories. Places where people disappeared. Steven tightened his jaw. His voice was barely a whisper. "Hold on, Ava. I'm coming." But before the story continues, have you ever witnessed someone being attacked or harmed before? And tell me, which city or country are you watching from? Share your answer in the comments. The streets blurred beneath Steven Seagal's tires as he pushed toward the industrial zone. Every red light, every jam, every slow driver felt like an obstacle. He passed each one with control, never reckless, but faster than any untrained driver could manage. His face remained calm, almost unsettling, like someone entering a situation he had faced many times before. He was not chasing blindly. He was tracking. And the kidnappers had no idea what they had triggered. Steven checked the clock. 7 minutes since Ava was taken. 7 minutes too long. He replayed every second in his head. Every sound. Every movement. His instincts were sharp, and he trusted them fully. Beneath years of discipline, the raw strength of a father burned inside him. He turned onto a narrow road leading into the industrial district. Abandoned warehouses stood over cracked streets. Broken windows reflected the fading light like silent eyes. This was dangerous ground. A place where screams went unheard. His phone vibrated. Hawk again. Steven, traffic feeds lost the van after the Labindalawa Teal Street camera. Either they turned into a blind area or went inside one of the buildings. Steven tightened his grip. They're not hiding from me. Hawk added, those men are linked to extortion and trafficking. Very dangerous. Steven's voice dropped into steady control. They're just men, Hawk. Men who touched my daughter. He ended the call. A piece of tire rubber on the road caught his attention. It was fresh, still warm. His instincts reacted instantly. The van had passed recently. He slowed the car and studied the ground carefully. Tire marks showed a sharp turn into a nearby alley. Steven followed. The alley was dark and narrow. Trash cans lay overturned. Graffiti covered every wall. At the end, a rusted metal gate hung partly open as if it had been forced. Steven exited his car without making a sound. He approached the gate, crouched, and checked the lock. It was not broken. It had been picked. Professionals, or at least they believed they were. Steven slipped inside and entered a large abandoned factory yard. Shipping containers, concrete pillars, and shattered glass created endless shadows. If the kidnappers were here, they had numbers. But he had skill. He scanned the area slowly, listening and watching. Years of Aikido training taught him to sense movement and tension. He lowered himself and touched the ground. Footprints. Money. Rushed and uneven. One set smaller than the rest. Ava's. She was here. Emotion struck hard, but he forced it back. He needed control, not feeling. A faint metallic sound reached his ears. He moved toward it, not rushing, but flowing. Each step was quiet and precise. He reached a line of shipping containers. The sound came again. Clearer. Two men talking. One louder. Steven paused his breathing to listen. The boss says she's valuable. We move her before midnight. Ava. His heart beat harder, but his breathing stayed steady. That was the line between emotion and discipline. I moved closer and took position at the corner of a container. Two guards stood outside a warehouse door. Armed, but careless. Loud. Unaware. Steven studied their stance, their balance, the space between them. Everything mattered. One wrong movement could expose Ava to danger. I stepped forward. A sudden wind hit the container door, making it clang. Both guards turned, but too late. Steven struck the first man before he could react. On smooth motion. Wrist turn. Elbow press. Body drop. The guard fell silently. The second reached for his weapon. Steven grabbed his arm, twisted, and disarmed him in under a second. A knee strike sent him down unconscious. Steven pulled the unconscious man behind a container and moved toward the warehouse door. His breathing stayed slow and steady. His focus was sharp. I knew he was close. Ava was inside. Nothing fear, pain, or the presence of multiple kidnappers would stop him from reaching her. If someone took your loved one, would you go after them yourself or wait for the police? Share your thoughts below. I read every comment. Inside the warehouse, the kidnappers believed they were secure. The building was worn down, filled with dust, oil, and rust, making it a place where anything could stay hidden. A single bright lamp hung above, casting long shadows across the cracked floor. In the center of the room, Ava sat tied to a chair, her wrists marked red by the rope. The leader moved around her slowly. Relax, he said. It will be easier if you cooperate. Ava stared at him, refusing to show fear that her voice showed. You will not get away with this. My father. The leader interrupted with a smile. Your father, what will he do, call the police or beg for money? He laughed and nudged one of his men. She thinks her dad is some kind of hero. Ava stayed silent, but her expression made the leader hesitate briefly before dismissing it. Outside, Steven Seagal moved quietly along the wall. Every step had purpose. He had already disabled 2 guards without triggering any alert. Now he stood listening. Inside, voices carried. Boss boy, why did we take this girl? This is too risky. We did not take her for ransom, the leader replied. She is leverage. Her father has connections and we need something from him. Another man laughed. Connected how? The leader shrugged. I do not know. Some old actor, maybe he did karate once. Steven's jaw tightened. Karate. I pressed his hand against the metal, checking for weak spots. The warehouse was old and damaged, but noise would risk Ava's safety. He noticed a small side service door. Lock. He took out a thin metal pick and opened it within seconds. Inside, stacked crates formed narrow passageways. Steven moved through them with patience and control. In the main room, the men kept talking unaware. One of them said, this place feels strange, like someone is watching us. I was right. From behind the crates, Steven saw Ava tied and trained to stay calm. That sight strengthened his resolve. He quickly said, hold on a little longer. I observed the room. 4 armed men, including the leader. Their positions were poor. These were not trained fighters. I planned his teaming. Aikido was about movement, balance, and easing momentum. He already knew how this would unfold. The leader walked toward Ava again and warned her that things could turn worse. Suddenly, a metallic sound echoed. Everyone froze. One man asked, what was that? The leader dismissed it as nothing. Ava recognized the sound. Hope appeared in her eyes. Another soft step followed. The leader sent 2 men to investigate. They moved forward holding flashlights. Moments later, silence was broken by 2 impacts and a choking sound. The leader called out. No response. Fear finally showed on his face. Ava whispered that. The leader raised his gun and demanded whoever it was to reveal himself. A calm voice replied, I already have. One man fell from above and Steven stepped into view. His expression remained steady. The kidnappers realized they had misjudged everything. The warehouse went quiet as Steven moved forward into the light. The leader tightened his grip on his weapon. You are her father, he said. Steven walked closer slowly. When you touched my daughter, you made the worst decision of your lives. The leader ordered the others to shoot. On fired. Steven moved quickly, taking cover and closing in. He seized the attacker's wrist, removed the weapon, and used a precise Aikido lock to drop him. The second man fired again and missed. Steven redirected the barrel and used immense momentum to throw him backward. The gun hit the floor. Ava watched in disbelief and relief. The leader grabbed Ava and aimed his gun at Steven. Take another step and she does, he warned. Steven stopped calmly. You do not want to do that. The leader argued that this was not a movie and that Steven was no hero. Steven briefly looked past him and nodded. The leader turned for less than a second. That moment was enough. Steven struck his wrist, causing the gun to fall, struck him again and swept his leg, sending him to the ground. Ava staggered backward, finally free. Dad. Steven moved between her and the kidnappers without hesitation. Are you okay? He asked, never taking his eyes off the men groaning on the ground. Ava nodded, her breath unsteady. I knew you'd come. That's my job, Steven replied calmly. But the danger was not over. One of the gunmen, shaken but still conscious, reached for the fallen weapon. Steven caught the motion from the corner of his eye. Before the man could lift it, Steven stepped in and struck with a sharp kick, sending the gun sliding across the concrete. The man collapsed, beaten. Only the leader remained, bruised, shaking, and trying to crawl away. Steven approached him slowly, each step steady and deliberate. Stand up, he said quietly. The leader froze. Stand up. You owe my daughter an apology. The man hesitated, then forced himself upright. His voice trembled. I didn't know who she was. I didn't know who you were. That's exactly the problem, Steven replied. You thought you could hurt anyone you wanted. You showed no respect because you didn't fear the outcome. The leader's breathing grew shallow. Please. I'm sorry. I made a mistake. Steven did not raise his fists or lift his voice. He leaned in and spoke with calm intensity. If you ever touch another innocent person, there will be nowhere on this earth you can hide. The words broke him. His legs failed, and he dropped to the floor in fear. Ava finally exhaled as terror gave way to relief. Steven returned to her and placed a steady hand on her shoulder. It's over. Before they could leave, the warehouse doors burst open. Red and blue lights flooded the space. By the time officers entered, 3 men were unconscious, the leader barely able to speak, and Steven Seagal stood at the center with his daughter beside him. An officer looked around in disbelief. What happened here? Steven nodded calmly. Just handled a family matter. More officers rushed in, weapons raised, uncertain of what they would find. But seeing Steven standing firmly beside his daughter, their tension faded into shock. The captain, a stern man with silver hair, stepped forward. Seagal, we received your distress call, but we didn't expect this. His eyes moved over the scene, downed attackers, scattered weapons, and the shaken leader. Steven exhaled. Neither did they. Ava managed a weak smile. My dad saved me. The captain nodded, respect in his expression. Looks like he saved us a lot of work too. 2 officers hurried to Ava and gently removed the last of the ropes from her wrists. On placed a warm blanket over her shoulders. Miss, are you hurt? I'm okay now, she whispered, leaning against her father. He made it in time. Steven rested a hand on her back. That's all that matters. Behind them, the kidnappers were cuffed and pulled to their feet. The leader glared weakly at Steven. You didn't have to go this far, he muttered. You kidnapped my daughter, Steven answered. It was meant to be simple, the man said nervously. Just pressure. Steven stepped closer. Innocent people are not leverage. They are not tools. And they are never targets. The leader lowered his eyes, completely defeated. An officer touched Steven's arm. We'll take over from here. Steven nodded as the kidnappers were escorted away, all of them glancing back with fear and disbelief. They now understood who they had crossed. The captain turned to Steven. Most people would have waited for backup. Steven shrugged. Most people aren't fathers. The captain gave a small smile. Fair enough. As the noise faded, Steven guided Ava outside. The cold night air wrapped around them. Police cars lined the street, lights still flashing. Ava looked up at him. You really scared them. Steven smirked. Good. She pulled the blanket closer. Dad, can I tell you something? Anything. I wasn't just scared because I was taken. I was scared I might never see you again. Steven's expression softened. You're my daughter. There is nothing in this world that would stop me from coming for you. A tear slid down her cheek. He gently lifted her chin. Fear doesn't make you weak. What you did makes you strong. You stayed calm. You endured. I'm proud of you. Ava hugged him tightly. I'm proud of you too. Their moment was broken as another squad car arrived. A young officer approached, breathless. Mr. Seagal, what you did in there was incredible. Steven shook his head. It's what any parent would do. Not every parent could, the officer said. Steven rested his hand on Ava's shoulder. Skill means nothing without a reason. She's my reason. Ava smiled at the officer. I think that means he's glad it's over. The captain returned. This case is going federal. These men were wanted in 3 states. Steven raised an eyebrow. Then I'm glad we stopped them tonight. You didn't just stop them, the captain said. You ended their operation. Steven glanced at the flashing lights. I did what had to be done. The captain placed a respectful hand on his shoulder. Go home. We'll handle the rest. Steven guided Ava to the car. As she leaned against him, she whispered, promise you'll always come for me like tonight. Steven smiled gently. I always will. Every time. Ava climbed into the car, safe at last. Steven looked back once at the warehouse, then started the engine and drove home. Justice that night came not only from the law, but from a father. By the time they reached home, the fear had faded. Ava rested on the couch, still wrapped in her blanket, while Steven sat across from her. You sure you're okay? I am now, she said softly. Because of you. By morning, the story spread everywhere. Breaking news. The kidnappers had targeted the wrong family. Videos leaked online showing police at the warehouse and the criminals being carried out. #surge. News stations replayed the footage non-stop. A reporter announced, last night, Steven Seagal rescued his kidnapped daughter from an armed criminal group. Another added, the suspects had no idea who they were facing. Ava scrolled through the comments. Dead, were everywhere. Steven sighed. Not what I wanted. But people are inspired, she said. Look at this. Thousands praised his actions. Steven gave a cute smile. As long as the message is right. What message? Ava asked. That strength matters only when it protects others. And courage is standing firm when those you love are threatened. At the press conference, the captain told reporters, thanks to Mr. Seagal, no innocent life was lost. When asked if Steven was a hero, the captain replied, he was being a father. Steven turned off the tea. They're overstating it. Ava smiled. You faced 6 armed men. I think they're being honest. I didn't do it to be a hero, he said. I did it for you. Later that day, Steven stepped outside. Neighbors offered quiet nods and words of thanks. One elderly man said, there is no greater honor than protecting your child. Steven accepted it humbly. That evening, father and daughter sat on the porch. Ava leaned on his shoulder. I learned something last night. What's that? That real heroes don't always wear costumes. Sometimes they're just parents who don't give up. Steven looked at her with pride. And sometimes, he said, they're kids who stay brave even when they're afraid. Ava held his hand. The nightmare was over, but the lesson would remain. Family is always worth fighting for. And real courage is born from love.